Addison. I'm being recorded. All right, great. Okay, so to get started with some key ideas, basically the abstract of my thesis. So first, addressing microplastics. So what are microplastics and why do they matter? So microplastics are less than 5 millimeters in size, and they're a very pervasive pollutant in the marine environment. So microbeads specifically are a type of primary microplastic, which means that they don't come from any other source. They're not a larger plastic that's broken down, but rather when they're produced, they're already less than 5 millimeters in size, usually somewhere in between 1.5 and 3.5 millimeters. So they're really small, and so it's really easy for them to get into waterways, which brings me to my second key point, which is that microbeads come from cosmetics and reach waterways through wastewater treatment plants, and also failure to properly manage wastewater. So the most common example of microbeads is in face washes, which I'm sure we've all seen before. And those microbeads are visible to the naked eye, but they are very small and they can oftentimes pass through water filtration. And then I focus on individual countries and the laws that they passed to ban microbeads and what they're doing to prevent pollution. So the countries I focus on are the United States, United Kingdom, France, New Zealand, and South Korea, all of which passed microbead bans between 2015 and 2017. And then I focus on what each of these laws do. They have some specific timelines and provisions that are different from each other and sometimes make it hard to collaborate between them. And then finally, I give some policy proposals of what more needs to be done and some ways that we as citizens can sort of become more knowledgeable about microbeads and how they affect us in our everyday. So overall, my question is, how have national microbead policies in developed nations influenced global microplastic pollution, and what further steps can be taken to end such pollution worldwide? So to get started, I chose to study microbead bans because because microbeads were noticeable to me in everyday life. I had this exact clean and clear face wash, and I sort of wondered what the plastics were. And so when I joined the Pite program at Michigan, I learned in my oceanography classes more about microbeads and why they're an issue. And a lot of alarming research came out in the past couple of years. For example, in 2018, I read a report about microplastics that were found in the Mariana Trench, which just shows that even the deepest part of the planet is polluted by microbeads. And in 2015, 8 billion microbeads per day were being passed through sewers and water filtration systems just from use in cosmetics. And I have this picture of the fish here because that's not sand, it's actually microplastic pieces. And so that just shows like how many microbeads and microplastic pieces there really are in the environment and how much of a concern it really has become. So with that comes the ecological and human impact. So fish oftentimes mistake microbeads for food. That's the picture on the right with the fish whose stomach is full of microbeads. And that's oftentimes a problem for birds as well and other marine species. And then, like I said, with the 8 billion microbeads, in 2015, the United States emitted enough microbeads to wrap around the planet 7 times. So we see that there are tons and tons of microbeads going into the environment, and what goes in the ocean goes in you. So if you eat fish and sushi and all sorts of raw fish and shellfish, you actually could be eating microbeads. So it just shows that it's not only impacting the environment, but it can be impacting our human bodies and contaminating us as well. So to get started with the laws, they all had differing timelines that can make it inconsistent and difficult for companies to decide when to phase out their microbeads and actually get them to do it, because sometimes that's half the battle. So the first microbead ban to pass was the United States with the Microbead Free Waters Act of 2015. And that was passed in 2015, but actually didn't reach complete implementation until last year. So that means that some microbead products that were already produced, already on shelves, or coming from imports from other countries were still allowed to be sold. And some of them are probably still in use. I'm sure a lot of us have old cosmetics sitting in our bathroom that we still use on occasion. And so it allows for microbeads to be used for a longer time than you would assume when the law passed. And then other countries like the United Kingdom and New Zealand had a lot shorter of a phase out period, which made it easier to immediately ban the beads and move on to a more solid solution. But the issue here is that if you have inconsistencies across the globe, you have companies that are going to take advantage of that and use that as an excuse to keep producing microbeads in, for example, in China, because they haven't had a ban yet, or keep producing them for longer in the United States than they would in the United Kingdom. So you have these differences that make it so that microbeads aren't really being phased out until, for example, in France this year. So hopefully we'll start seeing elimination of microbeads as a whole, but for a while we have the passing of these laws inconsistent and difficult to comply with. So next, the specific provisions. So all of the microbead bans that were passed in the countries I studied ban microbeads in rinse-off cosmetics, but that's a pretty narrow definition that allows for a lot of loopholes. So I've also listed other cosmetics, which are non-rinse-off, and that can be anything from glitter to lipstick that includes microbeads, and the only countries that included that in their law were France and New Zealand. And then other cleaning products, like some really abrasive household cleaning products, also have microbeads in them. And the only country that included that in their ban was New Zealand. And then two other things I want to discuss are bioplastic alternatives, which are like those compostable coffee cups that you get at the store that are technically not plastic, but they only break down in compost facilities. So if they reach the marine environment, they're still going to have an impact. And the US and France actually did ban those specific bioplastics in their laws while still allowing for innovation and other sorts of biodegradable alternatives. And then finally, the UNEP plastic components are 22 plastic chemicals listed by the United Nations Environment Program that are considered toxic to the human body and should be included in cosmetic ingredients. And the only country that took action on those specific chemicals is South Korea. And that's important because people don't recognize the names of these chemicals in their ingredient list. So you might have a product that you don't know has plastic in it because it doesn't say plastic, it says polyurethane or something that you don't really recognize as just a layperson buying a cosmetic product. So then what more can be done and what sort of is there already at the international scale? So I've listed some international policies that have framework in place that can be strengthened or used to help ban microbeads. So the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea has anti-pollution provisions where microbeads could be included in that, but right now plastic isn't listed as a pollutant. The Honolulu framework, on the other hand, actually focuses on prevention of marine debris and includes microplastics. So that helps give a better overview of how we as a globe can help reduce microplastic pollution. And then the UNEP plastic components are what I listed, but those are suggested to be eliminated from all cosmetic products across the globe. And then finally, the European Union. We've seen Sweden and now Italy both passing bans and suggestions for an EU-wide microbead ban that's more inclusive and makes it so that microbeads can't be sold in Europe at all. So then some policy proposals along with that. Some national proposals. If countries that already have microbead bans strengthen restrictions in their existing laws, it can help create cohesion across the globe. And then other countries that are either considering bans or haven't passed one yet can pass bans as well and help create this cohesion that we're searching for. And then internationally, including microplastics in legal codes like UNCLOS or adopting an international microbead ban can make it so that there's consistency across the globe and companies can no longer take advantage of places that haven't yet passed a microbead ban or are in a phase-in period where you can still sell microbeads. And then locally, improving infrastructure such as water treatment facilities and prevention of wastewater reaching the environment can really help. And this is a big deal not only in developing countries, but in developed countries too. We see a breakdown of infrastructure. I see it here in Michigan, and it's something that really helps prevent pollutants from reaching the environment. And then supporting grassroots movements and cleanup efforts. all of these laws passed because of citizen movement, whether it was Greenpeace or local organizations. Like here in Michigan, we had Clean Water Action, and Shed Aquarium helped out in Chicago to pass the Microbead Free Waters Act. And supporting those grassroots movements and beach cleanup efforts, however small they are, can really help raise awareness about microplastics and also prevent them from reaching our environment, and support lobbying efforts that get these laws passed. So finally, we're making progress, and the solutions I pose are so that globally we can finally eliminate microbeads from all of our products. They're something that exists out of convenience, they're not necessary, and they have a huge impact on our environment. So I'm just really glad that I was able to do this work, and I'm so grateful that you all came and listened to me on Zoom. So thank you very much. And I have some time for questions, I believe.
Thanks so much, Olivia. We have time for a few questions. And so you can ask questions either by unmuting your microphone, or if you would feel more comfortable, you can enter your question into the chat box, and I can make sure that Olivia sees that. So we'll open it up for some questions.
I had a question.
Please.
Okay.
I had a question for Olivia. Hey, good job, by the way. I don't know if you mentioned this, but the International Joint Commission, that oversees the Great Lakes, met this month, literally in April, to talk about microbeads. In addition to the U.S. having a ban, almost all the states in Ontario that abut the Great Lakes have bans as well. But I think they want to do something jointly to manage or ensure that the Great Lakes don't get any more microbeads. So that might be something good to look into in terms of developing, where it's going, and see what their findings were and what they kind of came up with. But it could set a good precedent for creating some kind of international framework, if you will.
Yeah, I haven't heard about that, but I'll have to look into it because that's right up my alley. So that's cool.
Okay, I'll ask one if I can.
Okay.
It's good to see you, Olivia.
See you too.
From the UK. You will realise my beard is twice as long as it was when I saw you last.
Yes.
None of us can get to the hairdressers.
No.
But I read your dissertation and greatly enjoyed it. You referred in the introduction to 2 of the individual states' governments had implemented legislation. So I'm asking a question both ways. Was that because, again, of the same community pressure on those governments to act? And then going the other way, did their implementation of legislation then either shame or lead the federal government into eventually doing the same?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I know in Illinois, especially, the other law was in California. They both passed before the federal ban. So in Illinois, it was spurred a lot by local movements, which I didn't get to talk about in the presentation just because of time. But that was really a lot of local efforts. There was a publication on how many microbeads there were in the Great Lakes that was really alarming for people like me who live in the Great Lakes region and use this water. And so that was spurred a lot by local movements. And then the same thing sort of happened in California. They were the second one to pass it, and that was also a lot of local movement, and a lot of times we see California leading the country in environmental law anyway. And then the second part, yes, they did help with the passing of this federal law. There was action and lobbying from these states to the federal government to ask them to please ban it nationally. But actually companies were also asking the federal government, now that there were these 2 states, to pass a national ban because it would make it easier for them for production purposes. Because if you can sell your products in every state except Illinois and California, it makes it difficult. So.
Yep. Good.
I have a question, Olivia.
Yeah.
Are there any, do you think, reasonable substitutes that could entice companies to switch over and get rid of the microplastics, quicker?
Yes, there are several. There are a couple really easy ones are things like coffee that are natural and biodegradable on their own and pose no problems for the environment. But actually something I put in the conclusion in my thesis was some researchers found a plastic enzyme that can sort of break down plastic, and it's like the bioplastic alternative, but it's more biodegradable. So it's a more advanced version of that, where it's technically plastic, but it will actually break down, unlike the compostable alternatives, which I just think is really cool. I think it was the University of Bath that did that. But yeah, I hope that that encourages companies to do something about it, for sure.
Yes, I love that. Nicely done.
Yeah, thanks.
So I have one question for you, which is, I guess more on the consumer side. So microplastics in sort of the scheme of products are pretty recent. And so from a consumer backlash point of view, what are people that into their microbeads that they're just unwilling to give them up?
From a consumer standpoint, I don't think so. I really struggle to find data actually about consumer opinion besides like the grassroots movements that were taking action. But microbeads didn't come out like in a lot of cosmetic products until the 90s. But that still means that they were around for 20 years before there was any action taken against them. So I think to an extent people were connected to them, but then once they realized the environmental impact, they were a little bit more worried about it. I think a lot of people just didn't think about it. Like, I know when I saw it, I was like, what is this? Like, you know, I didn't know that it was harmful, so.
Great. And then one final question from one of your cohort. So Ashley has the question of specific health impacts or severity of ingested microplastics in humans, and if you have a sense of what that is.
Yeah, so I could go on about that forever. I have a very long section about that. But the main problem is the chemicals that are in the plastics. I think we've all heard of things like BPA and DEHP that are like shown to be, through lots and lots of scientific research, harmful to the human body and can have endocrine disrupting properties. There can be birth defects. You know, they can make it harder for your body to digest things. So there is a really real impact of eating plastic, and I think on top of it, no one really wants there to be pieces of plastic in their digestive tract. That doesn't really sound pleasant, but there's actually a lot of emerging research about, you know, what the plastic pieces themselves do that I haven't really been able to touch on yet, but it's mostly the chemicals that we are concerned about right now. So.
Great. Well, thank you, Olivia. You did a wonderful job. We will virtually applaud you. And so very nice job on that, and thank you for sharing yours with us.